The People Power Revolution is actually one of the most controversial events in Philippine history, but not exactly about what happened, but of the many interpretations of it over time. So for this video, I just want to focus on what happened, the facts of it, based on some of the books I've read, which all of which I've sourced in the description. And hopefully in the future, we'll get more into the interpretations of the events when we go into talking more specifically about the administration of Cory Aquino. So I want to start this video by just beginning where the last video ended, which is that Marcos announced a snap election. He announced it late 1985, and the election was supposed to be in February already, and so they didn't really have too much time to get this all sorted out, the opposition, I mean. And so there are a couple of the different people, members of the elite opposition against Marcos, whether these are the Catholic Church, the businessmen, all sorts of different intellectual leaders. They decided to kind of come together in the house of Cory Aquino's mom in Dasmariñas village, and they said, okay, how can we figure out who the candidate should be to be president, or to kind of challenge Marcos, who would be the best one? The members of this group were called the Conveners Group, colloquially. And some of the members of the Conveners Group were Jaime Ongpin, Joaquin Bernas, who was the head of Ateneo at the time, Emmanuel Soriano, who was the head of UP. There's Alfredo Bergson, who I think was in government or a businessman, and Cardinal Sin and many other people. And so there were some people who, they kind of were going all around in a circle thinking who would be the best candidate. And a couple of the candidates that they brought up were, one of them was Doy Laurel, one was Eva Estrada Calao, Ramon Mitra, Jovito Salonga, Jose Diokno. And after a lot of conversation, they realized, I think the one who actually needs to run, the one who can best unite everyone, was one of the people who they weren't really considering, which was Cory Aquino, who was there in the house because, they met at her mother's house. And so Cory Aquino was very hesitant at first, but after a while, there's this guy named Chino Roses who amassed this signature campaign to say that Cory should run, and 1 million signatures were they got 1 million signatures. And so Cory said, well, if there's this much support for me, I guess I must run. Simultaneously, Doy Laurel also wanted to run, even though Cory Aquino was also planning to run. But what happened was Doy Laurel, or Salvador Laurel, who I think was the son of the JP Laurel, the old president, he was talked to by Cardinal Sin. Cardinal Sin kind of convinced him, saying, if you run with Cory running, we're going to split the oppositional vote and Marcos is just going to win again. And do you want Marcos to win? And so he said, fine, I won't run, and I'll just run for the vice presidency with Cory Aquino. So that's what ended up happening for the snap elections. Now, during the snap elections itself, there's some interesting things that went on. So if you remember from the last video, I talked a little bit about the Communist Party getting more power, or getting more, not power necessarily, but getting more support because of the various problems in the Marcos administration, especially economically, and in the sugar and coconut fields. The NPA was growing, more and more populous. During the snap elections, the CPP and the NPA, the communist groups of the Philippines, they didn't feel like it made any sense to kind of join the snap election. Why should we participate in an election that will definitely be cheated by Marcos? There's no way Marcos would allow himself to lose. So what's the point of even joining the snap elections? And so they actually boycotted the snap elections. The Communist Party and the NPA and all these people, and many people from the left, they ended up boycotting the snap elections, which ended up, being a mistake on their part, a strategic mistake, which we'll maybe get to in the future video about Cory Aquino's administration. But kind of a spoiler is that because they boycotted the snap elections, Cory Aquino ended up not liking them at all, and so they weren't able to really legitimize themselves in the government or get any kind of representation because of this decision to boycott the snap elections. The snap elections were supposed to, they introduced this thing called NAMFREL, which is from the US. They said, I know there's an awareness that maybe whether or not we're going to have an elections, Marcos is probably going to cheat. So they have this thing called NAMFREL, which was going to have an independent, which theoretically it was a neutral body that would count the vote as well, just side by side with COMELEC. COMELEC, again, is the government counting body for the elections. After the voting, when everything went on, COMELEC announced that they felt that, or they said that Marcos won by 1 million votes. I forgot the numbers, it's maybe 10 million to 9 million. So Marcos was declared the winner of the snap election. But NAMFREL, on the other hand, said that actually Cory Aquino won the snap election. They announced it when there was around 70% of the vote. They announced that Cory Aquino actually won. She's the true winner. Well, again, the COMELEC, the government one, said that it was definitely Marcos. And what ended up happening was that they were counting it. There were all these controversies because there was a group of people who were working for the Comelec who ended up like walking out of the building or quitting their jobs because they said that they were being forced to change votes. So they were forced to kind of remove Cory votes or to add Marcos votes. And clearly there was a lot of rampant corruption or a rampant voter fraud going on during this 1986 snap election. But to be fair, NAMFRIL itself wasn't necessarily the cleanest institution as well. As far as what, again, I'm combining things that I've been reading in many books. But NAMFRIL, according to one CIA operative who wrote this book about his like involvement around the world, he says that NAMFRIL was actually an institution that was originally made in order to help Magsaysay's election in the 1950s against Elpidio Quirino, which I don't remember. I don't think I've talked about it in this kind of channel or in this kind of social media feed. But there's a whole thing with Magsaysay and the CIA. But essentially, as the CIA guy claims NAMFRIL was actually CIA connected, and NAMFRIL itself was getting a lot of money and aid from the United States from this. It's a group called USAID. It's an Asian something development fund or whatever. So there's a lot of money going into NAMFRIL. There's a lot of support going in from American sources, and as well as there's a sense that supposedly some of the money that was going to NAMFRIL was actually also being siphoned off the RAM, the Reformed Armed Forces movement that was headed by the Enrile and Honasan and all these people. And so, some people argue that there seems to have been collusion of sorts between the United States government with NAMFRIL, with RAM, in order to usurp the power and make Cory the president instead of Marcos. Now, this is again something that I'm just bringing up because it's been in some of the books I've read, but I don't know if this is necessarily true. Of course, this is just what some of the historians I've read said. Regardless of that, there was very well documented voter fraud on the side of Marcos, especially. That was again well documented during the time. But again, it doesn't seem like NAMFRIL. One of the other arguments against NAMFRIL was that they announced that Cory became president with only 70% of the vote, and the remaining 30%, most of it was coming from northern Luzon, which, as we know, is Marcos territory. So because of these little things, it's given like fuel to these people who claim that Marcos actually did win the elections. And so it's a very complicated issue, and I don't really know the truth, but this is just some of the sides that I've read about. Okay, so RAM. After the snap elections, Cory says, no, definitely I won. NAMFRIL said so. And then Marcos says, I won. Look at the Comelec said so. There's a lot of like distrust going on around the public, especially after all these people were saying there was like, some people are coming out saying I was forced to change votes for Marcos. I was forced to do all this stuff. Behind the scenes, RAM, the Reformed Armed Forces movement headed by Enrile and Honasan, they were planning to have a coup. They wanted to take over the government, and they wanted to. So the plan was that they're going to take over the government, establish a revolutionary government with the head being Enrile, and then Marcos would be forced to resign. That was the plan. Again, RAM, I talked about it in the last video, but they're like this movement of, it's a Reformed Armed Forces movement that was trying to reform the military because of supposed lots of problems in the military, corruption problems, violence problems with local civilians. They had like, the AFP was getting a really bad name, and so RAM was this kind of reform movement within that group. And again, it was headed by Enrile's faction and Honasan and all these people. So, okay, the plan was we're going to go to the palace, we're going to kill Fabian Ver, who was the head of the Presidential Security Command. And the thing with that was like, Enrile, Ramos, they're enemies of Ver. They're kind of opposite sides. So they wanted to kill Ver, and then they wanted to get Marcos to resign. But what ended up happening was that somehow or another, Ver found out about this whole plan, arrested some of the RAM officers, and because of that, they were found out. And because the coup plans were found out before they could actually do it, this is on February 22, I think, 20 or 22, the coup plans were found out. And so Enrile asked Ramos, I think it was like, Ram is mostly Enrile and Honasan, but Ramos was kind of sympathetic as well. And at this moment of like fear that they're all found out, they're all gonna get killed, and it really calls on Ramos and says, Ramos, can you go with me to Camp Aguinaldo so we can kind of stage this thing and protect ourselves? And Ramos was more well liked within the military over there because he was very well respected, more so than Enrile. So Ramos decides, yes, I want to as well go against this dictatorship, go against Marcos, so I'll join you. So Ramos and Enrile go to Camp Aguinaldo, Camp Crame, And around the same time, Enrile calls on Cardinal Sin, saying that, "Can you please help me? Well, I think I forgot which one happened first. I'll say the one I remember. It may have happened first. Is that Enrile, when he went to Camp Aguinaldo, he called lots of press people to come, and he gave like a conference speech where he said that he thinks the real winner of the presidential election was Cory Aquino. So he openly says Cory should have won, and then later on he kind of wants help because he's trying to not get killed by the forces of Marcos. So he calls on Cardinal Sin and asks him if he could help him, have like a coalition to kind of protect him from Marcos. And Cardinal Sin uses Radio Veritas and calls a bunch of people to go out into the streets and protect to protect Enrile, Ramos, Honasan. So these three people, along with many other soldiers, were being protected by the human barricades, the human people on the streets. Cory Aquino at the time was not even in Manila. While all of this was happening, Cory Aquino was in Cebu. I forgot the exact reason why she was in Cebu, but she was in Cebu. And when she found out about all of this, she decided to come back home, come back to Manila. And when he was in Manila, she started to participate in the kind of the demonstrations. During this time, Marcos was quite, how do I say this? He was quite nervous about what was going on because more and more all these like maybe millions of people on the streets and protesting against him is really bad image for him in the international community, in the American community. And for the United States, they felt like we can't let this kind of continue like this. Because if something happens, if say like if Marcos is in his military starts shooting the people, starts killing people, violence, and goes out, very very bad for the United States because they're supposed to be the protectors of the Philippines or whatever in some kind of way, and on the other, and especially because Ronald Reagan himself was a big supporter of Marcos, so they couldn't let Marcos shoot the people, and they couldn't let the coup plotters kill Marcos and his family because either of those situations would be absolutely terrible. In the process, Marcos ended up like telling the soldiers not to shoot anyone. Don't shoot anyone. We'll figure it out. But then Marcos tries to call Enrile and asks him, that he tried to make a coalition with Enrile, saying, how about what if we work together, we'll have a revolutionary government, and maybe Enrile might be like a very high position in this new revolutionary government. And Enrile rejected the offer. On February 25, Marcos swears himself in, saying, I won the presidency, I'm the new president. And the same day, Cory Aquino does the same thing. But again, the United States, from afar, they were feeling very nervous about the situation. They don't want any violence to break out. They don't want any kind of controversy to kind of go on their way, especially, again, given how much they supported Marcos, or they continued to support Marcos. Reagan was a big supporter, even though many people around Reagan at the time were skeptical. And actually, throughout the 80s, many people around Reagan already wanted to have Marcos replaced in some manner, but they just didn't have an opportunity to do so. But Reagan was a very strong Marcos supporter. After a while, Reagan finally resisted and said, okay, fine. He acquiesced and said, fine, this thing should end. And a message went to Marcos from this guy named Paul Laxalt, and he told him, I think it's better to just cut loose. And I forgot the exact term. It's like cut loose or something. Cut and cut cleanly. And eventually Marcos leaves the White House, and he goes, and the United States gets him to fly out into Clark Air Base. Marcos wanted to go up to Ilocos to rest for a few days or something. That's what he said. But the United States ends up contacting Cory Aquino, who had, again, just had herself sworn in, and asked her, what do you think? Should we let Marcos go back to Ilocos? And Cory was like, of course not. Don't let him come back. Kick him out. And so Marcos eventually did get flown out from Clark Air Base to Guam and then to Hawaii. And that's where he ended up exiled. He got, by the, and all that stuff. So that's what happened. That is the story of the People Are Revolution. And those are just the details of sorts. Now, again, like I said, there's a lot of controversy with regards to how to interpret it. Obviously, the predominant interpretation is that it's an amazing reclamation of democracy, and Cory Aquino was the center of the whole thing, and that she's like somewhat almost like a saint of sorts for allowing us to kind of transition into democracy. Many other people find it more complicated because of the government that succeeded it was not an obvious improvement over some of the many issues that were going on during the Marcos administration. But I'm going to get into all of this stuff when we talk about the presidency of Cory Aquino.